Again, I want to thank you for joining us. My name is Ovide Lamontagne. I'm with the Bernstein Shore Law Firm, and I'm honored to serve as chairman of the Campaign for Legal Services Leadership Council. I've succeeded Erica Bodwell, but I'm also a successor to other fine New Hampshire people who've served. John Broderick, I think, is on Zoom with us today. He was scheduled to be here, and John really kind of set us on the right path as our founding president or chairman. So I want to thank Justice Broderick for his leadership of the Campaign for Legal Services. And so we look forward to continuing to work on this initiative. And we're particularly pleased this afternoon, to be joined by Senator Maggie Hassan, who's agreed to at least deliver some thoughts, reflections as we kick off our session here. So Senator Hassan, welcome. Thank you again for being with us. And if you want to unmute your screen, the floor is yours.
Ovide, thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership for the Campaign for Legal Services. Thanks to everybody on this Zoom call, and really to New Hampshire's entire legal community, because one of the things that always makes me proud about our state, both as a citizen, but also as a lawyer and a member of the New Hampshire Bar, albeit inactive at the moment, is the depth of commitment to providing legal services for all Granite Staters that our legal community has. And the Campaign for Legal Services is just such an important organization in terms of its effectiveness in raising funds and making sure that we're providing access to legal services at critical times in people's lives. But I also think you just do an extraordinary job really elevating the issue and helping average people understand why legal services are so important. So I'm incredibly grateful to you all for that. And your work and your voices have never been more important than they are right now. We are in times that are indeed unprecedented. I was saying in another call recently that my mother, who is quite a grammarian, always tells me not to overuse certain words. And I've been trying to think of words that are different than unprecedented to describe these times, and I just can't. Frankly, if any of you had told me that I would have gone through, or been part of, I should say, an impeachment trial and then a pandemic, and now what we're seeing after the murder of George Floyd, I would have told you that that confluence of events just would never have happened. But of course, here we are, and it has. And so a couple of thoughts. First of all, just George Floyd's murder, along with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and deaths of African Americans before them at the hands of police, I think really continues to shock the conscience, but also makes clear that our commitment as attorneys and as citizens to equal justice under the law is more important than it has ever been. We need to be able to speak about systemic racism in our criminal justice system. We need to be able to do more than talk about it and study it. We need to be able to act on it. So one of the things I am working on right now in Congress with my colleagues is some action items along the lines of a national standard for use of force that might help us take concrete steps towards improving criminal justice for all in our country. And I also will continue to raise my voice when I see any leader in this country abusing their power. That is what I believe happened Monday night when the President of the United States unleashed rubber bullets and tear gas on peaceful protesters right by the White House. And so I will continue to add my voice to those who say that that was an abuse of power, a violation of our constitutional principles, and something we all, I believe, have to speak out against, regardless of our political philosophies, affiliations, or parties. And then there's the pandemic. And I want to just thank you all, because I know that as the pandemic has ravaged the health of our people, but also the livelihoods of our people, you all are prepared to step up and help, whether it's helping citizens get unemployment benefits they need, whether it's helping victims of domestic violence. You know, public health officials have been telling us throughout this pandemic that we are safest at home. But of course, there's a group of Granite Staters who aren't safe in their homes. And I know how hard you all work to make sure that victims of domestic violence have representation and can be protected. And I'm particularly grateful for that. The CARES Act included, I think it's $50 million to try to help support legal services. And I think that's a really important first step. I know how much need there is out there already and how much more need there will be, whether it's domestic violence or somebody facing foreclosure or eviction because of the economic devastation that we're seeing. I know how important access to legal services are going to be in New Hampshire and around our country. I am, again, so grateful to all of you for the work you do. I know how busy you are, many of you in your private practices, and then you take the additional step of providing pro bono services along with financial contributions to make sure people can access justice. And I continue just to be very proud of the work you all do. Last thing I will say about what we're facing in terms of the pandemic and in terms of the need for legal services is that when I have met with public safety officials in New Hampshire over the last couple of months, they have all been very clear, as have healthcare providers, that many of the other issues that we have all been working on now together for some time around, for instance, mental health and substance use disorders are still pressing out there. And we are still going to have to find ways to help people get access to the mental health services they need, to the rehabilitation and recovery services they need if they have a substance use disorder. And we are going to have to make sure that as we are dealing with everything from peaceful protests to trying to reform our criminal justice system, that one of the things that we don't lose sight of is how important it is that people have access to treatment so that we can help them in a path that's different than going through the criminal justice system. So we have a lot on our plate. And I know it can be difficult when we go through the litany of what's going on in our state and our country to feel like there's an action plan in place or to avoid being overwhelmed. I will tell you that I am deeply concerned about what's going on in our country. I listed at the beginning of these remarks the things that concern me and that I think we have to speak up and speak out about. But I am also deeply confident in our capacity as Granite Staters and as Americans to get through this period of time. Sorry, tickle in my throat. To get through this period of time, whether it's pandemic or dealing with the long delayed actions that we need to take to make our criminal justice system a more just system. I'm confident that we will get through these times and we will come out on the other side of this better and stronger, more just and more equitable. I get to hear about, and at least via Zoom, witness the daily kindnesses that Granite Staters show to each other. I see the resilience of our young people finding different ways to complete their high school graduation, for instance, and get that diploma and celebrate it. I watch young people gather together over Zoom calls to start charities and make sure that they're helping citizens throughout the Granite State. And then I get to have calls like this one with all of you who I know are working so hard to raise the needs and the interests of people all around our state and make sure they're attended to. So thank you for what you're doing. I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. Please be in touch with my office, whether it's a particular client need that you think the federal government can help with, or whether there's a policy issue or a funding issue you think we need to know about. I am deeply grateful not only for your work, but I happen to know that you are all extraordinary human beings, deeply in touch with the people in our state and the needs in our state. And thank you, as always, for reaching out when you see them. I look forward to continuing to help make New Hampshire and our country stronger. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Maggie, for those words. And, you know, I think it goes without saying that supporting access to justice and legal services is a nonpartisan effort. And the fact that you and I are teamed up on this effort, despite whatever political differences we may have had in the past, cuts across the state, because we have Republicans, Democrats, libertarians, vegetarians, all supporting the effort. And it's important during these trying times to find those common areas where we can come together. And certainly law and order, peace and justice, and access to justice are all issues that we, I think, are unified by. And that strengthens us during these very trying times. So thank you for your words. And I remember well your comments to the kickoff breakfast, which we didn't have this year, but a couple of years ago. You drew upon your father's experience as a law professor and really spoke quite eloquently about the need to support legal services for those who are underserved and underrepresented. So keep up the good work for us. And we thank you for being part of our program today.
Well, and thank you. And Ovide, thank you for remembering my invocation of my dad. For those who didn't hear it, my dad always distinguished between charity and justice and reminded us all that justice is a lot harder because it means sharing power, but it's critical. So Ovide, thank you for your leadership and thank you for those kind words. And I look forward again to working with all of you, and have a good rest of your meeting. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. All right, well, I wanted to also move on now to our other presenters. I want to thank again Senator Hassan for joining us. And just to take a step back quickly, you know, at the beginning of this year, we were gearing up for a regular year of trying to help people who are in need, whether it's domestic violence or illegal or unlawful evictions and foreclosures, or the issues that people have to deal with where they have to interface with the legal system. And we were getting geared up for that, and we're going to continue to get geared up for that, because as the senator suggested, we need to prepare for the surge. There will undoubtedly be a surge once the PPP funding is over. People are truly laid off, and the moratoria are lifted on all sorts of things that are currently protecting people where they live. And so we're calling upon all of our resources, lawyers, business leaders, others who are willing to help put together the team to respond to that surge that is undoubtedly right. We're on the doorsteps of it, I believe. And so in order to give you a better appreciation of some of the things we're doing in legal services, I want to first introduce Erin Jazina, the Director of Domestic Violence Advocacy Project at NHLA. She's been with the NHLA since 2008. Erin, I understand NHLA was involved in some recent changes helping domestic violence survivors obtain protective orders despite the stay-at-home orders and the court closures. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here today and for your interest in the work that we're doing. So when the pandemic first started, there was increased and heightened concern for victims of domestic violence still residing in their homes with their abusers. They were essentially cut off from access. Those safe times when they were able to leave their homes, let's say to go to the grocery store or to bring their kids to school, were really no longer available to them. So they couldn't access a courthouse during regular courthouse hours between the hours of 8 and 4. So a group of us convened a domestic violence working group that consisted of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, court staff, private attorneys, and New Hampshire Legal Assistance was asked to be part of that as well. And really over a very short period of time, we came together and came up with a solution that would allow victims of domestic violence and stalking to access critical services like filing for a domestic violence protective order, but doing that without compromising their own health or the health of court staff. So what we came up with, and I'm really happy to announce that it was launched last week, between the hours of 8 and 3, domestic violence victims, those who are connected with a crisis center or the Stratford County Family Justice Center, can file domestic violence and stalking petitions electronically. So they can be in a safe location, whether that's at a friend's house or whether they're in their own home or whether they're at the crisis center, or even if they come to New Hampshire Legal Assistance, they can now access that protection without having to go to a courthouse and risk exposure to themselves and exposure to court staff. So it's a really, and I apologize, my dog is barking. So it's a really great opportunity for victims to access the protections that they desperately need while also maintaining their health as well. So we're very excited that that process is now in place, and I'm just incredibly grateful for everyone that came to the table to work on that in a very short period of time. NHLA and the crisis centers were able to run focus groups and put all that information together, and the courts were able to launch the forms, and we're just really hoping that it creates additional access for people, but again, maintaining safety on a number of levels.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for your leadership on that initiative. Can you give us a sense about the number of cases you're handling now? Are you seeing a surge yourself in terms of domestic violence matters that for which your project is being called, or what kind of trends can you give us an insight about?
Sure. So New Hampshire Legal Assistance, in terms of working with domestic violence victims, we represent clients in their protective order cases. So that's their domestic violence protective orders as well as stalking orders. And we represent victims and survivors in their divorce and parenting cases. And when the pandemic first struck, we saw a decline in our referrals. That was not unexpected. As I mentioned earlier, victims were not able to access their safe times when they might be able to leave the home, to access a crisis center, to access civil legal services. So the decrease in referrals from the crisis centers, as I said, was not unexpected. What we're seeing right now as restrictions are being lifted, we are seeing an increase in the number of referrals that we're receiving. Again, it's not anywhere close to the number that we were seeing prior to the pandemic, but we are seeing those increase, and we do expect that those numbers and referrals will increase significantly as restrictions ease even further. So we'll see an influx of protective order requests. We'll see an influx of requests for divorce and parenting assistance. And really right now we're just kind of turning an eye to how we can really meet that need, because we know that need will be overwhelming. And we would love to be able to say that we'd be able to represent every victim and survivor who comes to NHLA for assistance. But unfortunately, the need for assistance sure far exceeds the resources that we have. So we do know that many victims will go unrepresented in their protective order and family law cases.
Well, again, thank you for your leadership and your oversight of the program. And you know, we can shift focus a little bit, because the majority of the cases process and handle involve homelessness. And this afternoon with us is Steve McGelvery. He's a paralegal at Lark. He's a housing paralegal. He's an expert in it, where he's been dealing with these issues for 19 years. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of need from clients, and what are you worried about in the coming months?
Hi, Ovide, and thank you everyone for attending. Yeah, with the folks that I've been talking to over the last few weeks, they're mostly calling in because their landlords are threatening them with eviction for non-payment of rent. The landlords make it quite clear. They understand they can't make a move legally on their tenants, but they're upset. They're telling our clients what non-payment of rent is doing to them. And they're telling our clients as soon as they're able, as soon as the governor's moratorium lifts, they're going to start proceedings to evict them. And so our clients are calling in, a lot of them not with a written eviction notice yet, but with an oral threat or a text message from the landlord that their days are numbered. And, these are clients who lost their jobs due to the lockdown. Some of these jobs, I've been told from clients, they're not coming back, and they feel hopeless, and they're really looking for direction. They want to know what to do. We're telling these folks that if they're behind in rent, go to their welfare office, their town or city welfare office. And there are other agencies as well that may very well help them financially. But right now, we're talking to people, giving them a game plan, certainly encouraging them to call back if the landlord initiates the eviction process by serving them with a written notice. We've been in collaboration with New Hampshire Legal Assistance and the Pro Bono Referral Program. And like we've all agreed in our meetings over the last couple of weeks, we're waiting for the tsunami to hit, and we're trying to prepare.
Thank you for that overview. And we, as you mentioned, we're trying to collaborate with Pro Bono too to try to see if we can identify more lawyers who can help in this specific area, to be sure. So thank you, Steve, for your work. Our next speaker is Michelle Wangerin. She's the director of NHLA's Youth Law Project. Michelle, we barely know what school will look like in the fall, but can you tell us a little bit about where the Youth Law Project will be focusing its attention over the next few weeks and months?
Sure, Ovid. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here today. I think that school right now is something that we are all, I guess all parents are very focused on right now, what it looks like now, what it will look like in the future. And presently, we've done quite a lot of work triaging this change to remote learning and what that looks like for both students and parents and schools. And we're really in the triage process, ensuring that kids who struggle are still able to access their education in a meaningful way. What things look like in the fall is up in the air, but what we do know at this point is we applaud the governor's recent executive order that requires school districts to review the special education plans of students with disabilities, both prior to the summer and then again at the end of the summer, to figure out how they are doing, what they need, and what they will need to do to catch up with their peers. So in terms of our special education practice, we really anticipate calls from those families and working with families to ensure that their children are able to access appropriate services both over the summer and then again when school starts in the fall. And we are thankful that we have a really good relationship with the Parent Information Center, where they're really able to triage some of these cases, and then when it becomes a legal matter, we are able to take on some of those cases. One of our primary focus areas are at-risk youth and those with behavioral and social and emotional difficulties. And so we see a couple of areas of concern for that specific population. One in that one of my concerns is that currently New Hampshire statute allows schools to discipline students either for a short-term suspension, long-term suspension, or expulsion for any offense and for any length of time. And so one of my concerns when kids return to school is that these are kids who have been in a very unique situation, and we don't know what to expect in terms of behavior when they return to school in a more traditional setting. So one piece is to make sure that they're getting the services that they need, but also we want to encourage schools to work with these students to reintegrate them into the school environment before excluding them. And so we do have a pretty robust school discipline practice. And so I anticipate an uptick in that area when school resumes, and really just trying to work with schools to find creative solutions to address the social and emotional and behavioral needs of the students that are returning to school at that time. We also have some concerns that these kids have had no eyes on them for a very long period of time now. And it's going to be of utmost importance when they return to school to work with them and first and foremost, make sure they're okay before using exclusionary discipline on them and sending them back into what potentially has been and still is an unsafe environment. So that's really where we see the Youth Law Project focusing our case-related attention coming up. And I think it's an exciting time. I think there are a lot of interesting changes that will be where we can really be creative going forward in finding solutions for these kids.
Thank you, Michelle, for your work here in this area, and we wish you well as you know the school year finishes up, and then we ramp back up and over the summer into the fall. So for the audience, those are three discrete areas of our programs, and we're going to have a presentation now from giving actually a bigger picture view. First from Sarah Matson-Dustin, who's been the Executive Director of New Hampshire Legal Assistance since 2018. She joined NHLA as a staff attorney and Skadden Fellow in 2006, following a clerkship with Judge Barbadoro. And she's worked at NHLA for about 12 years altogether, including several years leading the systemic advocacy policy work at the State House. Sarah's NHLA's two largest funding sources are state appropriation and the IOLTA grants from the New Hampshire Bar Foundation. And Sarah, can you give us a sense about where how these funding sources are doing, and also what you expect in terms of funding changes, hopefully increased funding in the near and long-term future? Sarah?
Sure. Thanks so much for that question, and hello to everyone. It's really great to see all of you. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. It's a really interesting funding environment for civil legal services right now. There are opportunities that we've never had before. For example, the CARES Act money that the state GOFR, Governor's Office for Emergency Relief and Recovery, is distributing. And then there are funding challenges, which are similar to ones that we've experienced before. So about 40% or so of NHLA's funding comes from two sources. One is the Interest on Lawyers Trust Accounts program that is managed by the New Hampshire Bar Foundation, and the second is state funding, which comes through the New Hampshire Judicial Council. Both of those are funding sources that are prone to slump during an economic downturn. I'm really happy to say that the Bar Foundation, which is just an incredibly steadfast ally for the civil legal services community, is doing everything that they can in order to maintain level funding for the next year or so. We appreciate the way that they're stretching in order to do that. And what happens with the next IOLTA year really depends a lot on how quickly the economy recovers. So anyone who knows the answer to that question should let us know so that we can do some planning for the next IOLTA year. I'm sure anyone who follows the state budget for any purpose knows that there may be challenging times ahead. We receive $1.5 million per year from the state. This new state fiscal year starts on July 1st, so that is right around the corner. So we'll be watching closely to see what happens with the remainder of this current biennial budget, and then, as always, advocating for civil legal services funding in the next biennial budget. Our hope is really to make sure that policymakers continue to understand that civil legal aid is really at the front line of the economic relief effort in terms of the pandemic. You've heard folks from the programs talk about all of the different ways that we expect the need for our services to surge and to change. That is not going to go away when the pandemic is over, or even when the economy has recovered. For some people, we expect to see the lingering economic fallout of this for our low-income clients for years. So it's an interesting time in that we're waiting for the need to surge. It's already surging in areas like unemployment insurance. Our unemployment cases are about 10 times what they were last year at the same time, which is sort of an extraordinary surge. And I think that number could be 20-fold by a month from now. And it will come in waves across other practice areas. So definitely challenging times ahead, but not without bright spots. And we appreciate everything that everyone is doing to donate to the campaign and to volunteer through the pro bono program. We can really feel that you are all in this with us. So thanks so much.
So Sarah, one quick question. How's the morale of the staff at NHLA? How would you describe it under these really trying times?
So that's a great question, and that's a very kind question to ask how people are doing. So thank you for asking it. So about a third of our staff has young kids, school-age kids. So we have been in it with everyone in terms of figuring out work from home, remote learning, parents taking turns and juggling things. I think that I've noticed that people really have had just an attitude of kind of taking a leap of faith into this with us. People are willing to figure out brand new legal and policy landscapes. So figuring out what all of the various state and federal policy and law changes related to unemployment mean for our clients is not a small undertaking. As Michelle described, figuring out what special education is going to look like as we come out of remote learning and transition perhaps back into a more traditional setting. And people have just been up for it, to learn new things, to try new things, to do telephonic hearings where we may have a judge and 2 attorneys and multiple parties and witnesses in half a dozen different locations. In some ways, we found some silver linings. I mean, for us right now, we can have an attorney in Berlin representing a domestic violence survivor in Salem, and we're not paying for mileage. We're not spending 6 hours of travel. And that's not going to work in all cases by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it just shows that people are willing to be flexible during this extraordinary time. So we are hanging in there, and we're in it for the long haul.
Well, great. Please extend our support and appreciation for the team treading through these rough waters and challenging times. But you know, with your leadership, I'm sure they're going to continue to do very well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Brecky Hayes Snow, who's is with LARC. She's been with LARC since 1996, and she served as executive director since 2018. Brecky, LARC's largest funder is Legal Services Corporation. So can you give us a sense about where what you see coming in terms of financial support for legal service from the Legal Services Corporation, and what you think some of the challenges are and opportunities, frankly, for that? Brecky?
Hi, Ovid. Absolutely, and thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for taking the time to come and learn more about what we're doing with legal services right now, and for your obvious support for the work that we're doing. LARC has been the recipient of the federal legal services funding through the Legal Services Corporation since 1996. We're incredibly grateful for the support that we get from our delegation, particularly at a time like this. And with that funding, we provide, excuse me, we provide services to in the neighborhood of 4,000 people every year, primarily self-help support, advice and counsel to help people who are not going to be represented by an attorney and have to navigate their legal problems on their own. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been working with the pro bono program of the New Hampshire Bar Association and New Hampshire Legal Assistance to develop a response to the rising legal needs that we anticipate over the next several months. And as legal services funding is always interesting, this year, through the CARES Act, the Legal Services Corporation was awarded additional funding, which they used to provide grants in every state and Legal Advice Referral Center was the
You
recipient.
froze up on us, Brecky. You may want to say that again.
I'm sorry. The Legal Services Corporation received additional funding through the CARES Act this year.
Brecky, you're not coming through clearly.
I have at a complete loss about how to handle that.
I actually think that it may only be on your end, Ovid.
Can everybody else
now?
hear me?
Yeah.
Nod? Okay, so people are nodding. I'll keep talking.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
So with the additional CARES Act funding that LARC received, we are planning to hire another staff attorney to work collaboratively with pro bono and New Hampshire legal assistance, primarily in the areas of unemployment compensation cases and housing. We're hoping to create a more integrated system that will provide a full range of services from advice and counsel through direct representation and including the efforts of the volunteer members of the Bar Association who give so much of their time and energy to pro bono. We've seen a significant increase in cases related to this pandemic. In the last, I think, 7 weeks, we have seen more applications for unemployment compensation assistance than in all of 2019, and every week that number gets bigger. So in that case, sort of the surge has begun, and we're hoping that we'll be completely tooled up and ready to respond within the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Brecky. I'm going to ask the same question of you. How's your staff holding up, and how is everyone sort of responding to the challenges that are before us?
I think, you know, as Sarah said, I appreciate the question. I think it's hard for everybody. It's very interesting. Our staff is a very different population than New Hampshire legal assistants. Nobody on my staff has children. I mean, I have children. My youngest is 18. That doesn't really count. So those are the youngest. That's the youngest child that anyone on our staff has. At the same time, my staff faces a different category of sort of health concerns, I think, by virtue of being, shall we say, more seasoned. And so that causes a different kind of stress for them. But I have been absolutely impressed by their willingness to just dive into an entirely new way of managing their lives and their work, and to be flexible and to embrace changing the way that they have been doing their jobs for quite some time. So I think everybody's doing okay. I think at first there was an attitude that this was just going to be a short-term thing and we would all get through it. And the transition to acknowledging this was going to be more protracted was, in some cases, more challenging. But I continue to be pleased and impressed by the staff's efforts.
Great. Well, thank you for that feedback, and thank you for your leadership of the organization. Very good. So we're going to turn to some questions. Sarah Palermo, do we have any questions in the chat room? If you want to pose a question, let's start with trying to send them in through the chat feature, and then perhaps we can open it up more broadly for oral questions. But Sarah Palermo, any questions pending?
Well, there was a comment, not so much a question, but Representative Almy just highlighted for us all the stress that towns will be going through in their budget as homeowners and property owners face tighter budgets. There will be a percent of them who can't pay their property taxes. So a lot of cases that go through legal aid end up asking the towns for relief and support. I don't know if Steve or Sarah, just because we only have Steve representing housing and Sarah to speak to maybe more broadly the issue of benefits availability. So I see Sarah's finger.
Sure. So Representative Almy, that's a great point. We know that in New Hampshire, human services needs ultimately trickle down to the local level and put pressure on municipal budgets. And whether that's because people lose their housing and need help with either a hotel stay or a referral to a homeless shelter, whether that's because people are having a hard time paying for medications or buying groceries. I think no doubt that we are going to see an increase in need. I think we're already seeing it as you see the incredible food distribution efforts that New Hampshire Food Bank and the many different food pantries that they serve around the state are doing. So I think it's a great point. I know I, for one, am hoping that subsequent federal relief comes with state and local budget stabilization, because anything that we see come out of the state budget that in terms of human services and human supports is going to land at the doorstep of cities and towns all around the state. So keeping me up at night too.
Thank you, Sarah. If there are no other questions in the chat room, perhaps if someone has a question they'd like to pose orally, you can unmute your mic and
Could
ask
I
the
just
question.
follow up on that?
Sure.
What a lot of people are missing is that it's not just the people who are at the bottom of the spectrum who can't pay. The businesses are all trying to get their assessments down. And even if a town loses 10%, it has to give the entire amount that was due the school district, which is most of the property tax, as well as the entire amount that was due the county. That leaves them with a lot smaller, the 10% in my terms translates to about a 25% loss of town funds. They're going to be really, really difficult about their welfare budgets. A lot of them had been already.
Yeah, thanks for adding that dimension to the challenges we're going to face. And all right. Anyone else? Comment? Yes.
Hi, it's Patty Lovejoy. I'm on the board of St. Vincent de Paul's Community Assistance Center in Exeter, and we have experienced an incredible outpouring of funds. I mean, normally, January, February, March, April, May, we are running at a deficit and we get most of our funds near the end of the year. The donations to our organization have been amazing. I mean, we've gotten more than we would in a full year, and they keep coming in. There's so many organizations that are saying, donate to your local food pantry. We've actually seen less people coming in to get food, and we're not sure if it's because they're afraid to come out. But each time they do come, we are giving them so much food. I mean, probably 3 times what they would normally get. So maybe they're coming a little less often. But I think there's got to be organizations out there like ours that will be able to be tapped for, helping with when everything starts turning around, helping people with their rents, et cetera. And in fact, we're planning for that now as to how much we are going to allocate for that. But I can't believe that we're the only organization like that. And obviously, St. Vincent de Paul is kind of keeping their head down a little bit, not saying, hey, we've got all this money, people will come at us. But I think there's got to be other organizations like ours, and to make sure you're tapping into those in all of the communities, because we have a lot of funds that we are expecting to be using, not for food assistance, but for the other kind of community assistance. And we really expect helping people with rent, and we also work with them to help them put together a budget. And we would be working with them with their landlords of, how can we, spread some of this out. So you may not in the past have looked to organizations such as ours for assistance with your clients, but this would be a good time to sort of figure out what are those other organizations out there that may be getting a lot of additional funding right now.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Patty. That's a really good additional aspect or angle to pursue, especially as we try to deliver services at the local level. So really appreciate your feedback, and good luck with your continued ministry. in Exeter. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to offer at this time? Okay, well, that's a good segue to our closing topic, which Sarah Palermo will lead us to, and that is how you can help us and how you can help the campaign, help those in need. And there's a couple of opportunities coming around the corner that Sarah will tell us about. So Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ovide. Yes, so thank you so much to everyone for being here today. This was a really fantastic turnout. There's so many names in our list that I wish I could just give a shout out to everyone who came today. Really great to see you. I wish we were doing this, as Ovide said at the beginning, at one of the breweries or restaurants where we've done our receptions over the past few years, but this is going to have to be as good as we can get right now. This is always the time at those receptions where I step forward and say, you know, I would be remiss in my duty here if I didn't, you know, ask that if you've been inspired by the work that you heard about today, to consider please making a gift to the Campaign for Legal Services. We support New Hampshire Legal Assistance and the Legal Advice and Referral Center. It's crucial supplemental unrestricted funding that they can use to be nimble and to be responsive to the client needs and to changes in program requirements and staff needs as they pop up. And we have a really fantastic opportunity next week. We're taking part in New Hampshire Gives, which is being put on by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits. Starting at 6 p.m. on Tuesday night next week, there will be a dollar for dollar match for gifts up to $1,000. So it's an opportunity to double the impact of any gift you make for the first $250,000 in gifts made. It's the first time that this amount of matching funds has been so generous and that has been poised to make such an impact for nonprofits in the state, including the two that you've heard from today. So we'll be sending out information about that on emails and social media, but it's nhgives.org, and on Tuesday night you search for Campaign for Legal Services in the search box, and there will be stories of clients like those that Aaron and Michelle and Steve help every day, and you can choose you know, a level of giving that is comfortable and right for you at this time. And if you make it early enough, you'll be able to match that support from the Charitable Foundation.
Thank you, Sarah. And of course, our website is?
Our website, where you can make a gift at any time. You don't even have to wait until Tuesday. You can do it right now. It's nh-cls.org.
Okay,
big
great.
Donate button at the top there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us during this virtual lunch hour, lunch Zoom hour. The food was not too good, we understand, but we appreciate your understanding that we have to operate this way. As Sarah says, we're going to be doing this for quite a while, it looks like. But we'll be back together. We'll have a celebration. I'm sure there'll be a lot of energy when we do convene together in person. And so with that, I want to thank you all again for participating. Good luck to you all. Stay safe and healthy, and let's continue to work for those who can't help themselves.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Ovide.
Have a good day. Okay, take care.